The last text my sister ever sent didn't sound like her. I'm so stressed I can't even remember my own mother's maiden name. It was strange, not just the words, but the tone flat, tense, and sterile, like someone trying to mimic the way she spoke when she was anxious. I remember rereading it over and over, staring at the screen while my coffee went cold in my hand, heart pounding in a way I couldn't explain yet. Mariah Whitaker wasn't the type to go silent. If anything, my baby sister was the kind of person who texted you while walking down the street, while cooking eggs, while brushing her teeth. Her phone might as well have been sewn into her palm. That's how connected she was to the people she loved. So when a full day passed with no call, no text, no check-in, I knew something was wrong. It was February in Flagstaff, Arizona. The snow had started to melt into muddy ice, but the mornings were still cold enough to stiffen your fingers. Mariah was 2 months away from graduating from Northern Arizona University with a degree in criminology. She had worked like hell to get there, battled through addiction, the streets of Phoenix, and the kind of trauma most people would spend their lives running from. But she hadn't run. She'd stood tall, she'd gotten clean, and now she was glowing. She was 26, in love with a quiet, sweet guy named Yusuf Solak and 3 months pregnant. She had just visited his family in Turkey for Christmas, glowing in every photo she sent us. They were planning their future, talking about baby names, how they'd split parenting duties, and which room in Yusuf's house would become the nursery. She had just sublet her old apartment to a couple to make some extra cash. Cassandra and Eric, their names sounded ordinary enough. Mariah didn't say much about them, just that they were a little flaky and sometimes late with rent. Nothing that seemed like a red flag. February 13th started like any other day. Mariah had a list of errands. First, she was supposed to head over to her old apartment to collect rent. Then she'd study for her thesis presentation. She was laser focused on her topic, missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls in the US and Canada. She said it was the story she was born to tell, that no one listened to voices like ours, so we had to become the voice. When Yusuf called me around 8 p.m. that night, I could hear the fear in his voice before he said a word. "Dani," he said, "have you heard from Mariah today?" I hadn't. And when I checked my phone, there were no messages from her. None. Not since that strange text the night before. He told me he'd gotten 2 texts, one about being locked out of her online banking and another saying she was staying with a friend. No name, no explanation. Just, "I'll talk to you later." That wasn't her. Mariah never said things like that. She always overshared. She'd have told you where she was, who she was, with what they were eating, and probably what time they'd last pooped. I'm not joking. That's who she was. Those texts weren't just strange. They were chilling. By the next morning, our entire family was in a group chat calling messaging, refreshing social media. Nothing. My mom was already planning to fly out from Chinle. My father, who never panicked about anything, left work early. Something had shattered and we could all feel it. On day 3, we filed a missing person report. The police came to Yusuf's home where Mariah had been living. He told them everything, the last time he saw her, what she'd planned that day, the messages, the pregnancy. He even gave them her journal. That's the kind of man Yusuf is. He handed over everything, no ego, no hesitation. The officers did a sweep of the house, asked the usual questions, but didn't seem to think Yusuf had anything to do with it. One of them even told me privately, "He's genuinely worried. He's not our guy." Then they headed to the apartment she'd sublet, Unit 210 on Sycamore Avenue. It was locked. No one answered the door. A neighbor told the officers the tenants had left town a few days ago, maybe for Valentine's weekend. Nothing about the place seemed disturbed, just quiet, too quiet. But we had security footage. The building had a camera aimed at the front door, and when detectives played it back, it showed Mariah entering the building at 10:47 a.m. on February 13th, alone, wearing a thick coat, her backpack slung on one shoulder, her other hand resting on her baby bump. That was the last time she was seen alive. I stood beside the lead detective as he watched the footage. We kept scrubbing forward, waiting to see her come back out. But she never did. Hours passed. Days passed on the recording. Cassandra and Eric never came back. No one else entered the unit after Mariah. Something was very wrong. Within 48 hours, her face was everywhere: Facebook, Instagram, even local news. My cousin organized a GoFundMe to fly our brothers and parents out to Flagstaff. We handed out flyers with her smiling face on them. The words "pregnant" and "missing" were printed in bold red letters. We begged people to come forward with any information. And slowly a lead emerged. Mariah's credit cards were still being used. On the afternoon of the 13th, the same day she went missing, someone used her card at a convenience store in Gallup, New Mexico, about 300 miles away. The store's security camera caught a woman wearing a blue jacket, but it wasn't Mariah. Minutes later, her card was used again at a Tim Hortons off Route 66. This time, both the driver and the passenger were partially visible in the car. I held my breath as we froze the frame. It wasn't her. It was Cassandra and Eric. 5 days later, police in Las Cruces found Mariah's Toyota Corolla parked outside a shabby low-rent duplex. Inside were Cassandra Blake and Eric Holland. They were arrested on the spot for possession of a stolen vehicle and fraudulent use of Mariah's bank cards. But that was just the beginning. They refused to say where Mariah was. They gave stories that changed by the hour. First, they claimed she sold them the car. Then they said they hadn't seen her in days. I didn't sleep for a week. I kept thinking maybe she was being held somewhere. Maybe they'd tied her up. Maybe she was trying to escape. But deep down I knew. The moment I saw that footage of Eric dragging a large, heavy hockey bag out of the apartment on the 13th, I knew. He left, came back empty-handed, went in again. This time he brought Cassandra with him. Then another bag, then another. 3 trips, all quiet, all casual, like they were taking out laundry. I watched the video with my hands pressed over my mouth, barely breathing. I knew what was in that bag. We all did. But the hardest part, the part that still haunts me, was realizing Mariah probably fought back. That she screamed, that she pleaded for the life of her baby, and no one heard her. She had written her entire thesis about women like her, Indigenous women who vanish and are never found. She believed that if people just listened, just cared, things could change. She believed her voice could make a difference. She never imagined it would be silenced by people who didn't want to pay $680 in rent. That night, I lay awake and reread the last message she ever sent. I'm so stressed, I can't even remember my own mother's maiden name. And all I could think was, that wasn't her voice. That was someone trying to erase it. And I wasn't going to let them. You don't really think about how much space a person takes up until they're gone. It's not just their voice or their laugh. It's their smell lingering in the bathroom. It's the half-full jar of almond butter they insisted on keeping in the fridge. It's the chipped coffee mug you were always planning to throw away but never did because it was Mariah's favorite. It's the book she left in my truck the last time we went to the flea market. I found one between the seats a week after she vanished. The title made me laugh, Savage Appetite's 4 True Stories of Women, Crime, and Obsession. It felt like a cosmic joke. My baby sister, the true crime nerd, had become a true crime case. The day we found her body was the day the sun didn't come up for me. Not really, not in the way it used to. It had been 2 weeks since she disappeared. 2 weeks of press interviews, Facebook campaigns, GoFundMe links, tearful appeals, and silent screaming. 2 weeks of us begging the police to put pressure on Blake and Cassandra. 2 weeks of feeling like the world should be on fire but watching people sip their coffee like nothing had happened. Cassandra finally broke. The detectives said it took less than 10 minutes once they showed her the video. She's in the bag, one of them told me, avoiding eye contact. We know it, and she knows we know it. They showed Cassandra the security footage again. Eric dragging the hockey bag, Cassandra following behind like a ghost. Then they showed her the video on Blake's phone, the one where he joked about killing Mariah. The one where Cassandra laughed. I didn't know about that part until later. But I'd learn every detail eventually. That's the curse of being the one left behind. You don't get to forget. You don't even get to grieve, not at first. You get details. You get timelines. You get pieces of your loved one fed back to you in court transcripts and forensics reports. That morning, Cassandra finally whispered, "He did it. He smothered her." I watched. Then she agreed to lead them to the site. They didn't call me until after they had confirmed it. I was standing in the hallway of Yusuf's apartment when the detective walked up and gently touched my elbow. "We found her," he said. I don't remember much after that. Just a high-pitched ringing in my ears and someone, maybe me, sinking to the floor. I think I asked if the baby made it. He shook his head. I remember that. She was buried off Route 180 about 300 yards from the road, covered with branches and loose gravel. Still inside the hockey bag. She was wearing the same coat we'd seen her in on the footage. The autopsy confirmed what Cassandra said: suffocation. There was evidence of a struggle. Skin under her fingernails, bruises on her arms and face. Her mouth had been taped shut. I try not to picture it, but sometimes I can't help myself. I think about her hands clawing at the plastic. I think about the way her lungs must have begged for air. I think about the baby too. 3 months along, we just started talking names. I told her I liked the name Avery. She liked Luna. That night, I lay on the floor of her old apartment, the one she'd sublet to her killers, and cried until my throat went raw. The cops let me go in. I don't know if they were supposed to, but one of them, Officer Ramirez, just nodded and unlocked the door. Inside it smelled like bleach and something else, something faint and sour that made my stomach turn. All of her things were gone. They'd stripped the place bare, except one thing, a notebook on the top shelf of the closet. The cover was bent, the pages dog-eared. I opened it and found her thesis notes. I sat down on the floor, legs numb, and read until the words blurred. She had written, "If I go missing, I don't want people to say I was troubled. I want them to say I was tired of being ignored." I don't think Mariah knew how true those words would become. Or maybe she did. Maybe she knew that women like her, Native women, were twice as likely to be killed, more likely to disappear, and less likely to be found. Mariah wasn't just a statistic, but she knew she could become one. The next day, the reporters started calling again. Everyone wanted a comment. CNN, NBC, CBC up in Canada. Someone from Dateline even emailed me. I ignored them all. Instead, I flew back home with my mother and father to Chinle, in the heart of the Navajo Nation, where we buried her in the red earth near our grandmother's resting place. It was a small funeral, just family and close friends. The morning of the burial, my father built a fire and burned cedar. He stood silently, holding a feather, tears clinging to his cheeks like dew. Mariah's casket was white with silver trim. Yusuf placed a sonogram photo inside before we closed it. We buried them together. After the funeral, the anger set in, not the kind that fades, the kind that blooms in your chest like wildfire. I was angry at the police for not acting sooner, angry at the media for only caring once her body was found, angry at Cassandra and Blake for stealing a life over 680. But more than anything, I was angry at the silence. Because when an Indigenous woman goes missing, the first assumption isn't that she's been hurt. It's that she's off somewhere, using, running, causing problems. That's the lie we've been told, that we vanish because we want to. But I know the truth. Mariah didn't vanish. She was taken. Her voice was stolen. And if I didn't speak for her, no one would. So I did what I knew she would have done. I started speaking. I went back to Flagstaff and demanded a meeting with the district attorney. I pushed for first-degree murder charges. I gathered her thesis materials and sent them to her advisor at NAU. I contacted Amnesty International. I contacted the Native American Rights Fund. I contacted anyone who would listen. Within a month, a scholarship was established in her name, the Mariah Whitaker Indigenous Justice Fund for Native women studying criminology, journalism, or law. It wasn't enough. Nothing ever would be, but it was something. The court date was scheduled for the following fall. In the meantime, I kept telling her story on Facebook, on campus, on every podcast that would have me. One night, I got a message from a mother in Oklahoma. Her daughter had gone missing in 2012. No leads, no news, no body. She said hearing about Mariah's case gave her hope. Not hope that her daughter was alive, but hope that someone would care enough to tell her story. I cried for hours after I read that, because that was what Mariah wanted. She didn't want to be saved. She wanted to start something. She wanted to wake people up. So that's what I kept doing. I started wearing her beaded earrings when I spoke. I printed out flyers of her face, half smiling, half determined, and taped them to the courthouse wall. When reporters asked if I thought justice would be served, I said justice, no. But maybe truth. I didn't want justice. I wanted my sister back, and that wasn't possible. But I could make sure no one forgot her. I could make sure they remembered what they took. Not just a girl, not just a student, not just a mother-to-be. They took a voice. But I'm still here, and I'm still speaking. The courthouse smelled like dust and bureaucracy. Old paper, burnt coffee, and something sour underneath. Maybe fear, maybe rot, maybe both. I sat in the front row, 2 seats to the left of Yusuf, my palms clenched around a tissue that had long since shredded into bits. I hadn't slept the night before. My mother sat beside me, jaw locked tight, hands folded in her lap like she was holding prayer beads. My dad had flown in the night before and stood the whole morning arms crossed, as if the weight of sitting would let the sorrow cave in too deep. It was the first time I had seen Blake and Cassandra in person since Mariah's body had been found. They walked into the courtroom wearing the same orange jumpsuits, their hands cuffed in front. Blake had shaved his beard. He looked smaller than I expected, ordinary even. Like a man you'd pass on the street and forget about instantly. But I knew better. I'd watched the footage. I'd seen his eyes. Cassandra looked even worse. Her eyes darted to me once, just once, and then dropped. I don't know if it was shame, fear, or something colder. I didn't care. She was part of it. She let it happen. The judge entered. Everyone stood. The proceedings began. Their attorneys entered, pleas not guilty. That was the first slap in the face. After Mariah's body, the video footage, the text messages they sent from her phone, the evidence they were caught driving her car, they still wanted a trial. They wanted to drag this out. Make us listen to the details. Make us hear it all again. The prosecution asked the judge to deny their request for separate trials. Thankfully, the judge agreed. This was a joint act of premeditated violence, he said, and it will be tried as such. Then came the part I dreaded most, the discovery process. We were granted access to portions of the evidence, the coroner's report, the security footage, the statements made by Cassandra after she agreed to cooperate. I forced myself to read every page, every line. I had to, because if I didn't know what they did to her, I'd never be able to stand in front of a courtroom and speak for her. Cassandra's testimony said it started with an argument about rent. $680 was owed. Mariah had told them she needed it by February 13th, or they would need to vacate by the 20th. She was polite but firm, Cassandra told police. She said, "I'm not here to fight, I'm just here to collect what's owed." Blake apparently didn't like that. He was high, Cassandra admitted, on meth and something else. Paranoid. Convinced Mariah was going to call the police. He started pacing. Mariah sat down in the old recliner by the window. That's when it happened. He walked up behind her and started choking her, Cassandra had said. At first, I thought he was trying to scare her. Mariah fought back. She kicked over the table, scratched his neck, tore open a bag he tried to suffocate her with. So he used another, then wrapped her head in plastic wrap and duct tape. Then he slammed her head against the floor. The report said she likely died minutes later. Cassandra told the detectives that they sat there in silence for hours, unsure what to do. Then Blake told her, "She's gone. We deal with it." They went to Walmart, bought bleach, trash bags, gloves, a roll of plastic. Then they stuffed her into the hockey bag Blake used for road trips. They kept her in the apartment overnight, slept in the same room. The next morning, they took her body out in 3 trips and loaded her into Mariah's own car. They used her bank card to buy snacks and gas on the way out of town. She was in the back seat the whole time, Cassandra said. They drove west, slept in cheap motels. When they reached a patch of dirt off Route 180, they pulled over, dug a shallow grave, piled brush over her body, left her like garbage. When I finished reading the report, I threw up. I cried until I couldn't speak. I punched the side of my truck until my knuckles cracked. And then I pulled myself together. Because I had to testify. The trial was scheduled for September, but in July something changed. I got a call from the assistant district attorney. "Dani," she said, "they're changing their pleas." I sat down on the floor of my kitchen, knees drawn to my chest. "Blake has agreed to plead guilty to first-degree murder," she said. "Cassandra will plead guilty to second-degree murder and agree to testify." It felt like something deflated inside me. Not relief, not closure, just emptiness. Blake's attorney said he changed his plea because he didn't want to put the family through the trauma of trial. As if that mattered now. As if it undid what he did. Cassandra gave her final statement. In it, she said, "I let fear dictate my actions. I wish I had stopped him. I wish I had screamed. I wish I had left. But wishes don't bring people back." In court, I stood behind the podium, voice trembling, and told the judge who Mariah was. "She wasn't just a girl who got murdered," I said. "She was the girl who used to sing to me when I had nightmares. She was the woman who believed she could fix the system that would later fail her. She was going to be a mother. She was going to be a lawyer. She wanted to help other Native girls be heard. But she'll never get that chance." The courtroom was silent. I looked directly at Blake. "You stole her voice," I said, "but I'm still here, and I won't stop speaking." The judge sentenced Blake Holland to life in prison without parole. Cassandra received a life sentence with the possibility of parole after 10 years. 10 years. I wanted to scream. 10 years for standing there while my sister was murdered. 10 years for dragging her body. 10 years for silence. My mother stood up and shouted, "That's not justice," before collapsing into my father's arms. Even the judge looked shaken. "There are crimes," he said, "that defy words. What you did to this young woman, to her unborn child, to her family, it is unforgivable. This court recognizes the deep wound your actions have caused. I only wish the law could offer more, but it couldn't, so I had to. You think the end of the trial means the end of the story. That's what people assume. The camera crews pack up. The courtroom doors close. The headlines fade. People forget to ask how you're doing, and you learn quickly how to lie when they do. But for me, it didn't end. Not when Blake went to prison. Not when Cassandra started her sentence. And not when I visited Mariah's grave on what would have been her graduation day, standing in a pressed blazer with her scholarship folder in my hand alone. Grief doesn't end when justice is served. It lingers in the smallest moments. Like when I walk into a coffee shop and see a woman with a side braid and a turquoise necklace, and my chest tightens until I realize it's not her. Or when I pass by room 203 in the criminology building at Northern Arizona University, the one she spent hours in, and the doors open, lights humming, and I imagine her still sitting there, sketching out her thesis in blue ink. Or the worst one when I hear her voice in a dream. It's always the same. She says my name, nothing more. Just Dani. But she says it the way she used to, like I was the only person that mattered. The day after the sentencing, I sat with Yusuf on the patio of our family home in Flagstaff. He held a cup of coffee untouched. His fingers shook, but his voice didn't. "She never said goodbye," he whispered. I didn't know what to say, so instead I asked, "Would you help me finish it?" He looked up. Finish what? Her thesis. Mariah's notes had been scattered, half digital, half handwritten. She had outlines, interview questions, raw data she'd been collecting for over a year. I couldn't let it go unfinished. It was her voice, her mission, and it deserved to be completed. Together, Yusuf and I spent 3 months organizing her research. We pored over transcripts, sorted case files, and finished the chapter she had outlined. Erased but not forgotten, systemic disregard for missing Indigenous women in North America. We included her story in the final section, not as a case study, but as a voice reclaimed. Her professor, Dr. Kowalski, submitted the thesis to a journal focused on Indigenous justice. It was accepted. Mariah became the first student in the department's history to receive a posthumous academic publication. When the news came, I cried for hours. Then I walked to her grave and told her. "I finished it, sis," I whispered, pressing the journal against the sun-warmed earth. "You did it." But something in me still twisted. Because even as her name was honored, I knew there were still thousands of women whose stories would never be written. So I kept going. I joined the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women MMIWG Coalition for Arizona. I started speaking at high schools, tribal colleges, and community centers. I shared not just Mariah's case, but the pattern behind it, the silence, the data gaps, the jurisdictional failures between tribal, state, and federal authorities that let predators slip through the cracks. I learned to say things like Native women are 10 times more likely to be murdered than the national average. Many disappearances are never logged in national databases. Lack of federal funding hampers tribal law enforcement. Most of the time, the missing don't make headlines. I spoke in church, basements, gymnasiums, on podcasts. People called me brave, but I didn't feel brave. I felt haunted, driven by a rage so steady and deep it burned cold. People wanted to move on. I refused. In the spring of the following year, I was asked to testify at the Arizona State Capitol during a hearing on funding for MMIW data initiatives. It was my first time inside a room like that, polished wood microphones that made your voice too loud, and politicians who stared like they weren't sure if you were real. When I stepped up to the microphone, I unfolded Mariah's picture. "This is my sister," I began. Her name was Mariah Whitaker. She was Navajo. She was pregnant. She was a criminology student. And she was murdered by the people she trusted. I spoke for 8 minutes straight. I ended with the same words from her journal. My story isn't unique. Thousands of girls are exposed to the exact same experiences that I couldn't even fathom wishing upon another human being. There was silence in the room when I finished. Then one of the representatives, a woman with silver hair and a beaded pin, stood and said, "Let the record show this testimony changes everything." That bill passed. It wasn't everything, but it was something. I don't believe in closure anymore, but I do believe in movement. And movement came in small ways too. Charlotte Yazzie, a DNA student from Tuba City, was the first recipient of the Mariah Whitaker Scholarship. She sent me a handwritten letter. I didn't think there was space for people like me in the legal world. Mariah's story told me there is. I will carry her voice with me into every courtroom I enter. I read it 3 times, then framed it beside Mariah's diploma. Later that year, Dateline finally ran a segment on the case. They interviewed me, Yusuf, Mariah's advisor, and even one of the detectives. But the part that struck most people was the soundbite they used at the end. It was me standing at the vigil we held in Flagstaff that October. Her killers thought they could silence her. But her voice echoes now in classrooms, courtrooms, and every heart that refuses to let her be forgotten. We lit 237 candles that night, one for each Indigenous woman still missing in Arizona. I stayed until dawn. People ask me now if I ever feel peace. Sometimes I want to lie, but the truth is I don't, not yet, because peace implies an end, and I'm still walking this road, still fighting for the ones who never got the chance, Still hearing Mariah's voice in the back of my mind whenever I stand up and speak. Don't be quiet, Dani, she says. Make them hear us. So I do, because I know what silence costs. And I won't pay that price again. They say that grief changes shape over time. Maybe it does, but mine always seems to wear the same face Mariah's, the face I still expect to see in my rearview mirror when I drive at night. The voice I still hear when I roll down the windows and feel the Arizona wind cutting through silence. In October, just weeks after the Dateline segment had aired, I was invited to speak at a vigil in Tuba City, near where Mariah had done her first interviews for her thesis. The drive from Flagstaff along Highway 160 is long and lonely, stretching out over desert and memory. That road used to feel beautiful to me, timeless, sacred. Now every mile marker feels like a tombstone. Charlotte Yazzie met me at the community center just off Main Street. She was younger than I'd expected, barely 21, but her eyes were sharpened and still. She hugged me tight, her arms trembling. I don't think I'd be in law school if it wasn't for your sister, she said. Or you. I swallowed a lump that had been stuck in my throat for 2 days straight. The vigil was small, intimate. No cameras, just candles and elders and silence. Someone read the names of missing women. Charlotte read Mariah's. I didn't speak this time. I just listened. Let the words wash over me. Let the ache settle in my bones like sediment. That night, I stayed in a modest adobe guest house nearby. I couldn't sleep. Around 3 a.m., I stepped outside. The stars were brutal in their brightness, so many, so clear, it hurt. In the distance, I could hear coyotes howling. I sat on the front step, blanket over my shoulders, and waited for the morning to come. That's when I saw it. A faded sticker on the edge of the doorframe. Weather-worn but visible, MMIW. No more stolen sisters. And right beneath it, in black Sharpie, someone had written, "We are not statistics. We are sacred." I closed my eyes and whispered a prayer in Dine Bazad, the language my grandmother used to sing lullabies in. That moment didn't bring healing, but it brought stillness, and that was something. When I returned to Flagstaff, I found an email from a filmmaker named Matthew Smiley sitting in my inbox. The subject line was, "Highway of Tears, let's talk." I knew his name. He was the creator of a powerful documentary that followed the stories of Indigenous women missing along Highway 16 in British Columbia. It had aired years ago, but people still talked about it like it was sacred text. He wanted to include Mariah's story in a new project, one focusing on cross-border MMIW cases and the failures of law enforcement on both sides. It would be called Unheard. I hesitated. It felt like exposure, like digging up something I just started to bury. But after 3 days of silence, I wrote back. If her voice can help others, I said then, yes, let's do it. We filmed in Flagstaff on the NAU campus and at the site where Mariah was found. I stood under that brutal New Mexico sun, pointing at the patch of dirt where she'd been buried like trash, and told the camera what I wished I could have told her. You weren't disposable. You mattered. You still matter. When the documentary aired the following spring, everything changed again. Messages poured in, emails, social media, handwritten letters from reservations in cities and even overseas. Mothers of missing girls, sisters, aunts, fathers, strangers, all saying the same thing I see her in my daughter. Thank you for saying what we couldn't. We remember. Even the governor of Arizona issued a formal statement acknowledging the need for better tracking systems, more interagency cooperation, and mandatory cultural sensitivity training for state officers working near tribal communities. I wanted to believe it would all lead to change. But then the other kind of messages started, the ugly ones. She should have known better than to let strangers in. You're just using her death for attention. Another dead junkie Indian. I didn't show my parents those. Instead, I forwarded the threats to Yusuf, who took screenshots and sent them to a friend in cybercrime. Then I blocked the senders, took a few deep breaths, reminded myself why I did this. Because I had to. Because when Mariah died, she left more than a hole. She left a torch. In early 2022, I flew to Washington, D.C. to attend the first ever National Symposium on Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls, hosted by the Department of the Interior. Secretary Deb Haaland, the first Native woman to hold a cabinet position, gave the opening address. I sat in the audience, notebook in hand, tears silently rolling down my cheeks as she spoke. Our women are sacred, she said. Their stories matter, and we will no longer let their voices be silenced. Afterwards, she approached me directly. Dani, she said, holding my hand, your sister was extraordinary. You are too. I nodded, unable to speak. That night, I walked alone to the National Museum of the American Indian. At the entrance, someone had tied 2,000 red ribbons to the iron gate, each one representing a woman or girl still missing. I tied one more, for Mariah, even though she wasn't missing anymore. Because her voice, I realized, was still out there, still echoing. It was the wind that carried them. The red dresses, they hung from trees along the perimeter of the San Francisco peaks, strung from barbed fences, fastened to light poles along US Route 66. Some were long and flowing. Others short, worn, tattered. A few were no larger than a toddler's Sunday dress. Each one represented a missing or murdered Indigenous woman. Including Mariah. I hadn't planned to cry. I never do. But as I stood in this grass that early May morning, surrounded by the weight of absence fluttering in the breeze, the sob broke from my chest before I could stop it. Yusuf stepped up behind me and placed a hand on my shoulder. Neither of us said anything. We didn't have to. The silence said everything. It was National Day of Awareness for Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls, May 5th, and the event in Flagstaff had grown tenfold since the year before. People came from Window Rock, Chinle, Tuba City, Shiprock, and even from tribes as far as Oklahoma and South Dakota. They came with banners, drums, photos, and names. They came to remember. They came to fight. As I took the stage to speak, I looked out across the crowd and saw a sea of red shirts, ribbon skirts, turquoise jewelry, and solemn eyes. And then I saw her, Charlotte Yazzie, standing in the front row in a crimson ribbon skirt with Mariah's picture pinned to her chest. She gave me a single nod. That's all I needed. I stepped up to the mic. When my sister Mariah was murdered, I said her killers tried to silence her. But they failed because what they didn't know was that her story, our story, is not an isolated tragedy. It's a thread in a much larger pattern. And we're done letting that pattern be ignored. Applause followed, but what I remember most was the way the wind picked up again. The dresses spun gently like they were dancing. Later that afternoon, a mother approached me. Her daughter had gone missing in 2011. No investigation, no press, no case file that amounted to anything. Just a name in a tribal police folder, in a shrine gathering dust on a kitchen counter. I used to think it didn't matter, she said. But seeing all these people here, I think maybe now, maybe it does. That's when I knew we were making ripples. Maybe not waves, not yet, but ripples big enough to shake something loose.
That's tremendous.
That summer, I co-founded the Whitaker Justice Initiative, a nonprofit dedicated to raising awareness, funding grassroots investigations, and providing legal resources to families of missing Indigenous women. Our focus was simple: fill the gaps the system kept ignoring. Within weeks, we had volunteers on 4 reservations and a direct partnership with a Native-led DNA lab in New Mexico. Donations came in faster than we expected. Small bills, online tips, even handwritten checks from elders saying, "This is for our girls." One night, while updating case files at 1:00 a.m., I got an email from a grandmother in Montana. My granddaughter Jada went missing 3 years ago. We've never stopped looking, but no one's ever helped like this. Bless you for what you're doing. I know Mariah is proud of you. I cried again. Not from pain. From exhaustion, yes, but also from a kind of hope I hadn't felt in a long time. Because for the first time since Mariah died, I didn't feel like I was fighting alone. Gee. Then in August, I got a call I wasn't expecting. It was Cassandra Reyes, parole officer. I wanted to let you know she's applied to participate in an Indigenous Women's Healing Circle at the Perryville Prison Unit, he said. She's citing heritage from her maternal grandmother. I didn't say anything for a long beat. Then I asked the only question I cared about. Is there any proof on yet, he said. But under current policies, the burden of proof isn't very high. I hung up without responding. My blood boiled. Cassandra, who had watched my sister die, who had stuffed her into a bag like she was disposable, who had used her bank card to buy soda and snacks while her body cooled in the trunk and was now trying to reclaim culture. It wasn't just disrespectful. It was a desecration. That night, I went live on Instagram. Something I rarely did. I told the full story, the parole request, the fake claim of heritage, and what it meant to have our traditions used as tools of manipulation. This isn't a healing circle, I said. This is theater. She's not looking for peace. She's looking for parole. Within 48 hours, over 80,000 people had signed a petition demanding her removal from Indigenous programming. The parole board reversed their decision. Cassandra was officially barred from using Native cultural services while incarcerated. It was a small victory, but it felt like Mariah's spirit had been defended, and that mattered. So as fall approached, I returned to the place where it all began, 41 Cowie Hill Drive, the apartment where Mariah had gone that day, where she was last seen alive, where Blake and Cassandra had made their choice. The building had new tenants, but the bones of it remained the same. The sidewalk where she parked, the stairwell where Blake carried the hockey bag, the hallway camera that caught his last visible lie. I didn't go inside. I didn't need to. Instead, I placed a small red handprint on the wall near the entrance. Then I left. Mariah had done the work she was meant to do there. Now it was my turn to carry it forward. And I would, as long as I have breath, as long as we have sisters still disappearing. I will not stop. Because she wouldn't have. And because silence like a red dress on a fence line never stays still for long. The night it happened, I was at my desk sorting through old files from the Mariah case for a speaking engagement in Phoenix. Yusuf was in the kitchen making tea, his footsteps a steady rhythm behind me. A storm was building outside Thunder Low and growling like something wild in the distance. That's when my phone rang. Unknown number. I don't normally answer those. But something told me to pick up. I said, hello. The voice on the other end trembled. Young, shaky, desperate. Is this Dani Whitaker? Yes, I said. Who is this? My name's Kaylee. I saw your sister's story online. I think I'm next. My breath locked in my chest. She continued, a voice rushing like floodwaters. I'm in Winslow. My ex, he's been threatening me. He knows I've been talking to the MMIWG group here. And last night he left a bag on my porch. With a red ribbon inside, just the ribbon. That's supposed to be a sign, right? Like a warning, huh? I stood up, knocking my chair over. Yes, I said quickly, my voice low. That's a warning. You need to leave, right now. She was sobbing by then. I've gone to the cops. They say there's nothing they can do unless he actually hurts me. But I know what that means. I know what comes next. I can feel it. I grabbed my car keys. Text me your location. I'm coming to you. No, she said, frantic. Don't come here. You're not safe either if he finds out. I hesitated, but she was right. So instead, I called in every contact I had. Tribal police, advocates, a woman from the Navajo Nation Justice Center who owed me a favor. Within 30 minutes, Kaylee was picked up by an advocate and moved to a secure shelter outside Holbrook. She was safe for now, but that night I couldn't sleep because I knew what we had just done. We'd stopped another Mariah, just barely, and I couldn't shake the feeling that it wouldn't be the last. Taha went down. 2 weeks later, we were proven right. A call came in from the White Mountain Apache Reservation. A 16-year-old girl named Elena Yazzie had gone missing from her aunt's home. No forced entry, no note. Her phone was found on the front porch with a red handprint drawn on the back. That symbol, the red handprint, used to be ours. A marker of protest, of resistance. Now predators had flipped it, turned it into a calling card, a threat. I drove out there myself. When I arrived at the house, the family was gathered on the porch, candles flickering in a rough circle. The aunt, a weathered woman in her 40s, held up a photo of Elena and said to me through clenched teeth, "They're hunting our daughters, Dani." And I believed her. What followed was a 48-hour coordinated search effort. Volunteers, tribal officers, dogs, even drones. On the second night, we found Elena, alive, bruised, terrified, but alive. She had escaped through the back of an abandoned trailer where she'd been held for nearly 36 hours. Her captor had fled when he saw the search team swarming the area. No one had ID'd him yet, but Elena said he was native, familiar, someone who knew how to blend in, how to act like he belonged. And that chilled me to the bone, because this wasn't just random violence anymore. It was organized, intentional, coordinated. Somewhere in the seams of these towns and borders, there were men watching, waiting, learning from each other's cruelty. We had a network. Now they had one too. Him. That's when I did something I never thought I would. I went back to the prison, Adobe Mountain Women's Correctional Facility, the place where Cassandra Reyes was serving her sentence. I asked for a meeting. They told me I'd never get one, but I did. Cassandra sat across from me in the visitation room. No shackles, just a prison jumpsuit and that same dead stare I remembered from the trial. "I heard you've been busy," she said flatly. I didn't respond. Instead, I pulled out a folder and slid it across the table. Inside were photos of Kaylee, of Elena, of 6 other girls from the coalition who had narrowly escaped abduction in the last year. "I think someone's continuing your work," I said. Her lips twitched, not into a smile exactly, but something close. A grim little curl. "Blake was a coward," she said, "but even cowards leave blueprints." I leaned forward. "What does that mean?" She looked me dead in the eye. "You think this was about money, about rent? That's what we let you believe. But it wasn't. It never was." Then she stood up and walked out. Dawn, I didn't sleep for days after that. I pored over the case files again, rewatched the interrogation tapes, re-examined the messages she'd sent from Mariah's phone. There were patterns I hadn't seen before. Coordinates, references, names buried in joke texts. Slang I thought was just meaningless turns out it was code. Blake and Cassandra weren't just two drugged-out losers killing for cash. They were connected to something bigger. A trafficking ring, and Mariah had gotten close to exposing that. Her thesis, her interviews, her relentless questions, she was scraping too close to a truth that somebody didn't want revealed. So they silenced her and made it look senseless, random. But it wasn't. It was a hit, a targeted erasure. And now they were doing it again, which meant I had no choice. I had to keep digging, no matter what it cost. I used to think justice was a courtroom. 4 walls, 12 jurors, a judge behind the bench, a gavel coming down like thunder. I don't think that anymore. Not since I realized justice doesn't always wear robes. Sometimes it wears hiking boots, or a red dress, or a press badge. Sometimes it's messy, loud, inconvenient. Sometimes it's just a sister who won't stop asking questions. I remember the night I confronted Yusuf with everything I'd uncovered about the trafficking network, Mariah's coded notes, Cassandra's smug confession, the pattern of abductions along the border between New Mexico and Arizona. I was pacing our apartment like a woman possessed. We have names, I said. We have locations. But if I go public with this, if I even breathe it in the wrong place, it could get me killed. Yusuf didn't flinch. He reached into his desk, pulled out a hard drive and said, "Then we start backing up everything." Twice. That's how the Whitaker files were born. A sprawling collection of data testimony evidence and audio clips, all pointing to what Mariah had died trying to expose a loosely connected but highly mobile trafficking ring, exploiting Indigenous women across state lines. Tribes with limited jurisdiction, counties with broken chain of command systems, girls with no paper trails. It was the perfect hunting ground, and Mariah had started pulling at the thread. They killed her before she could unravel it, but they didn't count on me. We coordinated with journalists, off-the-record federal contacts, and 2 retired tribal judges willing to put their reputations on the line. Every file we had was duplicated and uploaded to a secure server. Then I made the call. A live interview on Good Morning America, a primetime expose on 60 Minutes. The New York Times feature ran on Sunday with the headline, "The Network That Kills Indigenous Women and the Sister Who Refused to Stay Quiet." It went viral in 6 hours. The FBI was flooded with tips. Suddenly a task force was activated. Project Red Echo focused on coordinating between tribal, state, and federal agencies. Funding was allocated. Missing persons databases were finally being updated with tribal data. Even Interpol got involved when they realized some of the victims had been trafficked internationally. But with visibility came danger. In January 2023, I started receiving death threats again. This time they weren't anonymous. One man used my sister's name in the subject line. Yusuf wanted me to leave town, just for a while. I told him no. If I disappear, I said they win. So I stayed, kept going, kept telling the truth. One press conference at a time, one mother at a time, one sister at a time. On March 3, 2023, almost exactly 9 years after Mariah's body was found, I stood at a podium in Washington, D.C., and testified before a joint congressional hearing on missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. The chamber was packed. When I walked up to speak, I carried Mariah's photo in one hand and her thesis notes in the other. My sister wasn't just murdered, I said. She was erased. By ignorance, by bureaucracy, by the belief that our lives are somehow worth less. But she was sacred. And now her voice is the one echoing through this building. I didn't cry. Not then. But when I stepped down, I saw my parents in the gallery. My father with his fists clenched in his lap. My mother holding a single eagle feather in her hands. That's when the tears came, and I let them. Later that spring, we held a dedication ceremony on the edge of the San Francisco peaks. A new trailhead plaque carved from red cedar. The Mariah Whitaker Memorial Pathway. A sacred place for reflection, remembrance, and resistance. You are not forgotten. You are not alone. We planted red sage and wild sunflowers. Women left moccasins and handwritten in prayers. Children painted rocks with messages like justice for Auntie Mariah and no more stolen sisters. The wind picked up as we sang a DNA protection song. I closed my eyes and imagined Mariah standing there, smiling, free. The weeks that followed were quiet, in a good way. Kaylee, who'd once called me in a panic, was now volunteering with the initiative, helping young women draft restraining orders and track online threats. Charlotte Yazzie graduated law school and started clerking for a Native-owned firm that specialized in tribal sovereignty cases. And me, I finally opened Mariah's last journal, the one we found in a shoebox under her bed after the funeral. I'd been too afraid to look for years, too afraid it would break me. But it didn't. It made me whole. There in her own handwriting was the sentence that still plays in my head when the nights are long and the work feels endless. I am not afraid of vanishing. I am afraid of being quiet when it matters. Oh, Mariah matters, and so do all the others. Rayanna Jolene Savannah, Ella Mae Rose Germain, the names we chant, the names we paint, the names we carry in our mouths like holy things. They are not statistics, they are stories. And I will spend the rest of my life making sure they are told, because justice isn't a destination, it's a road. And I intend to walk it one red dress, one prayer, one truth at a time.